What's up, investors? It's the Russian debt. Let's talk about the invisible cost of Russia's war. The part that does not show up on propaganda broadcasts or in flashy reports about liberated towns. The one that the bloggers and YouTubers do not even want to talk about, except very few. Forget the numbers created by generals who have never seen war sitting in their polished offices. Forget the grand speeches where words like victory and security gets thrown around like confetti. Let's go down to the ground, to Russian villages instead, where life was already hard before Putin's so-called special military operation, and now looks like a never-ending funeral procession. Let's talk about Akbasheva, a small cluster of settlements in the Chelyabinsk region, where fewer than 3,300 people remain, and 17 men already confirmed death in Ukraine. Might not sound like a lot, but that's a little over 1% of male population killed in the war. Now that puts things in perspective. For comparison reasons, that is 1.6 to 1.7 million American men. That's not a statistics, that's a generation erased. These are the kids who once sat in classrooms of 7 and now reduced to just a handful of survivors. This is not war as glory, this is war as demographic annihilation. And while cemeteries fill, the homes of the wounded turn into invisible prisons where wives, mothers and children become unpaid nurses. So today, let's talk about the collapse of rural Russia. The wave of maimed veterans flooding towns, the cynical propaganda that rebrands mutilations as opportunity, and the cruel fantasy that Russia is somehow winning. And I'm not even talking about winning in Ukraine, if you did not guess it yet. Imagine a village school where once just 7 kids sat in the classroom. Now picture one of them dead from a car crash, another killed in Ukraine, and 2 more reduced to wrecks of human beings. One can no longer talk, the other may not even be conscious at this point. This is Akbasheva. This is not some faraway metaphor. This is the brutal arithmetic of a place with only 3,276 residents, where 17 men are already confirmed dead, and the real number is most likely higher. Based on these numbers, it is relatively safe to assume that more than 100 is currently fighting in Ukraine. This is almost 10% of male's population. Coming back to the US example, imagine a war where 16 to 17 million men are deployed. This is 20 times more than the total number of US soldiers deployed to Afghanistan over a 20 years period. This is the scale of demographic catastrophe. Coming back to Akbasheva village, every obituary posted by the local administration VK glosses over the fact that more were killed, more disappeared, more returned in wheelchairs or boxes. And here is the most ironic part about it all. The propaganda banners still hang proudly, celebrating anniversary of old wars as if those plaques of young dead boys are just decorations. This is the regime's relationship with its people in basic understanding. Bashkirs, Tatars, or whoever happens to live far from Moscow, they're not citizens, they are expendables in the eyes of Putin. These rural communities drained of men are collapsing demographically. Local economies already on life support are now completely choking. Every able-bodied man taking means one less worker in the fields, one less father for the kids, and one less son to carry the family forward. When the Kremlin waves the flag and yells about defending Mother Russia, it is literally ripping the mothers and fathers of these tiny villages and then turning them into empty shells. To Putin's Russia, Akbasheva is nothing but a reservoir of disposable bodies, and is being drained completely dry. Because these reservoirs can be kept quiet, the complaints of these people will never be heard, and once the village is completely vacuumed of its residents, the regime switches to the next one. And this is not new. The same applied during the First, Second World Wars, Chechen Wars and war in Afghanistan, and now in Ukraine. The state never cared for the well-being of its people, especially during the times of confrontation and hardships. And history shows that the state never will care. For now, we've been mainly focusing on irreversible losses. What about the notorious category of injured? You already know how Putin's Russia treats them, right? Let me tell you what, the situation is absolutely brutal if you are from one of such distant regions. Let's talk about those unfortunate in our next chapter. Now let's shift from the dead to the ones who did not get quote-unquote lucky. The wounded. Russia has produced hundreds of thousands of them, men who were once strong, once providers, now living corpses dependent on wives and mothers to spoon-feed them. Officially, the Moscow Times reported nearly 400,000, quote-unquote, once again disabled by war, whatever it means. Even if you adjust for double counting, the figure is astronomical. But you will never see their faces on state TV. You will never hear their wives begging for diapers, medicine and basic supplies. These families live in hell, but in silence. Take Sergei Shramkov, for example, in Rostov region. Blind, in a wheelchair, holes in both his legs, cramps in his arms. Local bloggers dared to film him, and it caused such a scandal that the government rushed to pave a strip of asphalt the width of his wheelchair just outside his only building. And that's it. This is what care looks like in Putin's Russia, a single concrete path, while the rest of the neighborhood and the rest of the region pretty much rots. Hundreds of thousands of Sergeys also exist across Russia, but they remain invisible. Their families do not just lose a breadwinner, they become permanent caregivers. No social workers arrive, no serious financial aid appears. The Kremlin has absolutely no plan for these people. These people are erased from public view, yet they are true monuments of this war. And here is the bitter irony. Cemeteries, at least, are visible. You can drive for miles past rows of fresh graves, flags waving over fresh mounds of dirt, which were not there still last week. But disabilities are hidden. They are inside apartments where families spend their days preventing bed sores and praying their sons do not die choking in the night. That is the face of this war that Russia's propaganda refuses to show you. And it never will, unless it is forced. And even then, they pretend like they care just until the story inevitably disappears in the media flood. But what if I told you being forgotten might not even be the worst thing to happen to you? What if I told you that the state actively exploits, manipulates and even humiliates some of these injured people for their own propagandistic purposes? Would you believe it? Well, if anywhere it is possible, it is definitely going to be in Putin's Russia. Let's talk about such unbelievable phenomena in our next chapter. So, how do you keep new records signing contracts when 500,000 men are either dead or maimed? Easy, you rebrand mutilation as a success story. Russian state TV has made it even an art form. Enter shows, for example, like Budem Zhit, we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, Let's Live On, where a veteran who lost a leg in Mariupol now rollerblades on a prosthetic, grins for the cameras, and lectures audiences about resilience and sacrifice. His name is Anton Filimonov, call sign Rocket. He's not portrayed as a victim, but as a celebrity, proof that losing a leg is not a big deal, at least from the Russian propaganda perspective. But I mean, let's be honest, this is manipulation in its purest form. Russian TV carefully curates which disabilities are allowed airtime and which are not. Missing a leg? Fine, it's okay. But if you're missing both eyes, half your skull or your mind, well, obviously forget it, you don't exist, you will never be shown. These are not the images for the masses. The Kremlin's message is clear. Look, a prosthetic will make you climb mountains. It will make you look like a Terminator. The government will also pay you millions of rubles. You will even become a hero. What they will not say is that most prosthetics are garbage, that may not even fit, that sometimes even cause new injuries. They will not say that families have to empty their savings to order a new, better alternative from Europe, the one where it supposedly is prohibited. And they will not talk about wives spending nights massaging stumps to erase phantom pain while the state shrugs. They will not show the countless veterans who cannot speak, cannot walk, cannot see, because those men would scare potential records away. And if there is one thing the Kremlin is afraid more than losing people, is to not have soldiers, new soldiers at all. And so, as a result, the propaganda spin disability as a lifestyle brand. They turn suffering into a show, and disabled are the main clowns of these freak show performances. The state has absolutely no problem exploiting these people, focusing on their misfortunes and playing on people's emotions. And here's the twisted part, probably the most for them. For some viewers, drowning in debt, even this grotesque portrayal is enough. They look at Rocket with his multi-million contract and think, maybe I too can trade my body for fame, money and some kind of meaning. It's not war anymore, it's a life and death lottery. Lose a limb, win celebrity status. That is the poison being literally poured into Russian living rooms night after night, not just from TV, but also from the radios, from the internet and from their smartphones. All this ties back to the central lie, that Russia is winning. That towns reduced to rubble are trophies. That each slow, grinding advance, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Chasiv Yar, Pokrovsk, is proof of triumph over the desperation. This is the war game fantasy being sold to the Russian public. Soldiers die cinematic deaths, the wounded bounce back with cool prosthetics, and progress is only slow because generals value the lives of their troops. This is the bedtime story. The reality is Akbasheva's shrinking classroom. The reality is Sergei Shramko trapped in his wheelchair. The reality is hundreds of thousands of Russians living half-lives while cemeteries grow by the mile. And yet, ordinary people are told not to worry. Look, they say, Ukraine is collapsing. Look, we are taking more territory than ever. Look, the West is faltering, we're about to win soon. It does not matter if it takes a year to capture one more pile of bricks. It does not matter if those bricks are uninhabitable, minded and worthless. What matters is the illusion. That's why obituaries are written in soaring, heroic language and published sparingly. That is precisely why the maimed are erased or rebranded, nothing in between. The regime wants Russians to believe this war is a noble chess match, not a butcher shop. But let's make it crystal clear. Russia lost the war the day it invaded. Every coffin, every wheelchair, every ruined family proves it. Ukraine may be bleeding too a lot, but for Russia there is no prize, no redemption, no payoff, no end goal. Just piles of corpses, empty villages and families condemned to live as invisible slaves to the wounded and to the state. That is clearly not a victory. That is self-destruction disguised as conquest. So, where does this leave us? With Akbasheva, a tiny village where nearly every 10th man has been drafted, where classrooms collapse into cemeteries, where the survivors are broken in body and spirit. Multiply that by thousands of villages and towns, and you see the true map of Putin's war. Not a map of captured cities, but of obliterated families. Meanwhile, propaganda turns suffering into a show, amputations into adventures, funerals into heroic achievements. You should deserve a military funeral, they say. But the truth seeps through anyway. Russia is not winning. Russia is not even surviving. It is bleeding itself dry, one small community at a time. And while the Kremlin tries to hide it, the truth is there for anyone willing to look. But not on Channel 1, obviously not. But in the empty classrooms of Akbasheva, in the wheelchairs of men like Sergei, and in the silence of families too exhausted to speak. Well, there have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work, the links are below. Thanks much for watching. See you tomorrow. We won't succumb to their tricks, the façade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.